War is usually the physical fight and also the propaganda. Like propaganda is a critical component of any war. You can have all the best arms and very well-trained army, but if you lack that component of propaganda, then you can so easily lose to an enemy who might not have the resources you have, but they're very good with their propaganda. And it seems like propaganda has always been part of wars between nations. And in the Greco-Persian War, it was the case. There was a lot of propaganda going on from both sides, and both sides were very good with the propaganda they were running. In Herodotus' book, he gives us a few of those propaganda attempts or activities or programs, if I might call them so. Now, I'm going to give you one example from both sides, from the Persians and from the Greeks. Now, at the war at Artemisium, I've talked about this, at the Battle of Artemisia, I've talked about this in my previous video. This was a battle that was more about fleets, the ships, the war at sea, you might say so. The Greeks were disadvantaged in terms of the size of their fleet. It wasn't as big as what the Persians had. But nevertheless, the Greeks managed to put on a very strong resistance. And in fact, we can say to some extent they matched the Persians. I told you in the previous video that the Greeks, some generals had to be bribed by the block of people who lived near Artemisium or in the islands around that place, so that they could not retreat. And indeed, they did go to a battle the first day, and the Persians could not overcome them. And at the end of the day, the Persians went back to their camp, and the Greeks went back to their camp. And during that night, it rained a lot. There was a lot of storm, and the Persians were scared because of it, because during this time, people could be very superstitious. And for them, the way the weather was behaving was not okay to them. So the next day they go, there's another battle, and the Persians try to come, they would try to encircle the Greeks, but they did not manage to overcome them. And that's because while the Persians had a lot of, or many ships, they were disorganized, and sometimes their own ships could damage one another, and that did not work well for them at the battle. So the second day goes, the third day, they fight again. I think there was a third day. And at the end of it, they also everybody goes back to their camp. But then at this point, the Greeks are feeling the heat. Yes, they are standing up to the Persians, but they are feeling the heat, like they are taking a lot of damage and destruction. And they are feeling, while they are marching the Persians, they are feeling like they are losing the grip. And that evening, the generals come together again, and they have a conversation, and they decide what we are going to do. We are going to retreat. We retreat so that we give ourselves time to recover, so that we can re-engage when we are in a better shape than how we are at the moment. But they decide to do something, and this was done by Themistocles. Themistocles is the guy who was bribed by the Euboeans, and he went and bribed the other generals. He's the guy who came up with a plan. He was like, we are going to retreat. But he said, I feel like, or I think we can beat the Persians if we are able to detach some of the allies from them, especially the fellow Greeks who were allies of the Persians. And at this point, there were several, we can call them Greek city-states, that were allies of the Persians, or tribes. And the specific tribes that had allied themselves to the Persians were the Ionians and the Carians. And Themistocles thought if there was a way they could take away the Ionians and the Carians, or persuade them to leave the Persians and either come to their side or just stand aside, then they had a chance of beating the Persians. Now, he came up with a plan, and he sent out some guys to go I think it was at night, and write some writings on rocks, on places they knew the Persians would pass by, the Persians and the allies, of course. And his plan was to two things to happen. But here is the message first, before I tell you what he was trying to achieve. Now, the message read like this: Men of Ionia, you do wrong to fight against your own fathers and to give your help to enslave Greece. We beseech you, therefore, to come over, if possible, to our side. If you cannot do this, then we pray you, stand aloof from the contest yourselves and persuade the Carians to do the like, or to do the same. If neither of these things are possible, and you are hindered by a force too strong to resist from venturing upon desertion, at least when we come to blow, fight backwardly, remembering that you are sprung from us, and that it was through you we first provoked the hatred of the barbarian. So he told them, he leaves this message on several rocks, and this message is targeted at the Ionians and the Carians, but the message is also meant that if it's read by the Persians, it's going to achieve a certain goal, and I'm going to tell you what that goal was. So he tells them, you people are our descendants, or as tribes, of course. One tribe can say the other is their descendant, meaning they came from them. And it's not okay that you people are allying yourself with the Persians to fight us. So we are asking you to do either of these. Either you desert and leave the Persians and come to our side, or you just remove yourself from the war and stand aside and just let us deal with the Persians. But if that is not possible, and this is where now the message is targeted at the Persians and is intended for the Persians to read it. If it's not possible for you to come to our side or to stand aside and let us deal with the Persians, then do this. When we come to fight and you are with the Persians, to quote him, he says, fight backwardly, which meant, like, yeah, you come with the Persians as you are one of you are a part of their army, but when the battle starts, you start sabotaging basically the Persians, basically fighting them at the battlefield, maiming them and hurting them in a way that makes them vulnerable to us. So that was the message that were left on rocks along the coast. Now, Themistocles was looking for two possible outcomes from these messages, and it was, if the Ionians found these messages and the Carians and read them, that was an opportunity that they could be persuaded and do what he had asked in the message. But if Xerxes or his people read the messages, he wanted to create doubt in Xerxes' mind about the commitment of the Ionians and the Carians. And by creating that doubt, he will make Xerxes not trust these people to be part of his sea fleet, and that, of course, will achieve the goal that Themistocles and the other generals were looking for, and that is alienating the Ionians and the Carians, removing them from the fleet, because they knew if we remove these two nations from that fleet, there is a likelihood for us to overcome the Persians. So the message would be a win whichever way. It could be a win if the Carians and the Ionians read it and decided to do what he's asking them to do. Because of be a win if the Persians, which was most likely that the Persians were going to come across these messages. Now, that was the propaganda from the side of the Greeks. Now, from the sides of the Persians, when the Greeks at Eltemisium decided to retreat, and they retreated, Xerxes received a message from some guys who told him the Greeks have retreated. And he sent out some more people to investigate, and he found out, yeah, these people have run away, basically. And he decides to pursue them. And on the way, he comes across several other smaller villages, and he conquers them, basically. But then he decides he wants to show these villagers how ruthless he can be, so that they pass the message to other Greeks not to resist the Persians. And this is what he does. He puts many of them on ships and brings them to the island where the Persians were camped initially, and where they had fought with the Greeks, and there were so many dead bodies there. But here is what Xerxes did. Xerxes had lost close to 20,000 men, and the Greeks had lost about 4,000 men. So if you show people that, of course, they will be like, you've lost 20,000, these people lost 4,000. Then it seems like you're not as strong as you're trying to tell us. But this is what Xerxes did. He sent people earlier to go and bury all the 20 except 1,000. And they buried them in trenches covered with soil, and then they cut trees or branches and put them, foliage basically, put it on top of the graves so that they are not visible. And then he left 1,000 Persian soldiers here and 4,000 Greek soldiers, dead bodies, that is. So when he brought these Greeks to view this scene, the message he was trying to pass is that you can't play with the Persians. We are tough. See, we kill 4,000 and they kill only 1,000 of us, while he had lost a lot of soldiers in that battle. So that was a propaganda. He was trying to create this image of them being stronger than the Greeks, while it wasn't really the case. And he wanted to have these Greeks from the nearby villages see this so that they can share this message with others. And then there's another place where Herodotus tells us, just around that time, he gives us this other story of these guys who came as deserters from the Greeks. This could be another propaganda, although Herodotus doesn't make it so clear that it was a propaganda operation. But these guys come and they present themselves to Xerxes as deserters from the Greeks. They were two guys. They come, they say they are deserters. They no longer want to fight on the side of the Greeks. They want to be on the side of the Persians. And they are brought before Xerxes, and Xerxes asks them, so what are the Greeks doing at this time? And these guys tell them that they are watching the Olympics. And the Persians are like, what do you mean these guys are the Olympics? They are watching the games. And one of the Persians asks, so why are they competing? What do they get at the end? And they are like, they are given that, I'm forgetting the name of that that thing that winners at the Olympic even today, they have that thing they put on their head to show that they are the winners. And that was the only thing that the winners received. There was no monetary compensation or payment. So that kind of surprised the Persians. And the way this story is told is kind of like these people could have been sent by the Greeks to make the Persians think the Greeks are not fearful of them, that we are not fearful of you people, we are even watching the Olympics, or we've gone to watch the Olympic sports, so you are not a big deal to us. So yeah, so and these are just small or there are so many other incidences in the book Histories about propaganda, and I think I've recorded another video before where I talked about propaganda that the Scythians did on Darius, and Darius had to run from Europe because they played around with his mind. It was kind of like a psychological war game, it was a psychological war on him, and he had to run away because of that. They didn't even have to fight him. So there are so many incidences in the book where we have this propaganda between different nations, and in particular between Persia and the Greeks. And to be honest, they are really these people were smart. Like when you see these things they were doing, like, yeah, these people were really smart and they knew what they were doing. Even though they were fighting with swords and spears and arrows, their strategy was like really it can just be as useful today as it was useful then. Yeah.